Have you noticed that China treats Islam and COVID the same way with quarantines? I've said this before, but it's sort of remarkable in terms of the difference of how China thinks of things like religion and the rest of the world does. And I'm not even going to say they're wrong or right. It's just an interesting contrast. There's a story in Fox News asking the same questions I was asking, which is, why don't we quite understand why China was doing, allegedly, so much better with coronavirus? Now, I think that no matter how much they're lying, and you have to assume that they're lying a lot, even if they're lying about how much they're doing well with coronavirus, we would notice. I mean, you couldn't miss it if they were doing poorly. So there's something happening that China is doing that's working out. And I'm wondering if it comes down to this one thing, where if you're in a hotspot, they'll make you stay in your home for 2 weeks. And I thought to myself, why wouldn't that stop the entire epidemic? Suppose you just said, hey, people, this is what we're going to do. I want all of you to stock up with food for 2 weeks. And for 2 weeks, we're going to ask everybody to literally stay home. Don't get in your car. Don't add gas. Don't buy food because you've already stocked up. Or if you do buy food, only use a delivery service. Let's say the delivery services stay in business. But everyone else just stays home for 2 weeks. Now, you couldn't do this. You couldn't do it in this country, right? So in the comments, I'm seeing lots of resistance. So there's no legal way you can do it. But let me ask you this. If you could do it, wouldn't it solve the problem? Wouldn't you literally be done in 2 weeks? I guess the only way you'd have exposure is if somebody in your house gave it to somebody else, and then a week later they gave it to someone else, and then at the end of it, that house would still be infected, I guess, at the end of 2 weeks. So I guess that could happen. But suppose you said everybody lock up for 2 weeks, or how about this? You have to lock up for 2 weeks, or until every member of the house has tested negative, I don't know, once or twice. Because then you could get out in 24 hours if you got tested, right? What about that? You have two choices. Have a positive test that says you're negative, or stay in your house 2 weeks. Somebody says this has nothing to do with the virus, for frick's sake. What do you mean it has nothing to do with the virus? So China treats a mental virus, if you will, just like a medical problem. And in their opinion, the Uyghurs, being Islamic, have essentially a mental disease. That's the way the Chinese are treating it. And they're treating it by quarantine and re-education. It's basically the way you treat a virus. And here's the weird thing. Suppose China went the other way. It's not going to happen, but suppose they went the other way and said, you know, freedom of religion. Well, I would imagine that the Islamic population within China would expand over time. They might have more children if they followed their religious, let's say, cultural patterns. And eventually, Islamic conflict of their belief system with the Chinese government's belief system, quite incompatible. And it would be a growing and growing problem, sort of like a tumor growing within China. Now, I say that regardless of who the group is. Now, we're talking about the Uyghurs and we're talking about Islam, but it would be the same if it were a Christian group that were doing a lot of missionary stuff and trying to grow their numbers. A Christian group growing within China would also be incompatible with the Chinese system. So eventually that small problem would become bigger. So China deals with it by trying to eradicate the disease of religion as they would see it. And ask yourself this: are they wrong? Are they wrong? And let me say it this way. We in this, certainly in the United States, and most of you watching this, would put freedom of thought and freedom of religion, freedom of speech as our highest principles. So of course it's wrong by our standards. It's as wrong as you could get. And we seem to have figured out how to make a country work with all this, different views of the world. But in China, given the size of their country and how hard it would be to control a country of that size, I feel like it's a different risk level. That their risk of letting another religion become big enough to conflict with the government's control, that may be a risk that risks, I don't know, millions of deaths. If it became a big civil war at some point in the future, it could actually threaten the entire existence of China as a good functioning body. So I think China is almost treating it in a warlike stance, that you can't allow that level of freedom because it weakens the country. In the long term, it would weaken the country. And again, I'm not saying it weakens the country because it's Islamic. I'm not saying it weakens the country because it, could be Christian or could be, Judaism or any other religion. I'm saying that anything that's incompatible with the Chinese government way of doing things eventually is going to be a problem. And it's a big country, so it could be a big problem. So is China wrong to eliminate that risk? By our standards, 100% wrong. If you said what will save the most lives, I don't know. That is a little less clear. They might be doing what will save the most Chinese lives, at least, but at the great risk of essentially perpetrating a Holocaust. Not essentially. It's basically a Holocaust against the Uyghurs. And the rest of us, we just fucking watch it. Just like it's not happening. We watch it, we mention it, we tweet about it, but we don't care. Let's be honest. The rest of the world is perfectly willing to let another Holocaust happen right in front of us. So if you thought that the original Holocaust in Nazi Germany, if you thought that really was a never again situation, maybe never again for the Jewish population. Maybe they have enough power now that they could make that never happen again. But it is happening. So it's happening right now. Will China kill more people with fentanyl, or will they do it with propaganda or economic warfare or with COVID? I asked that question on Twitter. And interestingly, COVID was the lowest response. So obviously a very unscientific poll. But the public answering it thought that China will kill more people with their other ways of killing people, as opposed to the pandemic.